Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. So we're using a platform called On24 to hold this webinar. If you're not familiar with it, everything you see on your screen can be moved and resized to your preference. So for example, you can expand the presentation slides to full screen if you wish. To submit questions, which we encourage you to do, please use the Q&A tool on the left-hand side of your screen. We have a Q&A segment at the end of this webinar. For the best viewing experience, we recommend closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background. And finally, we are recording this webinar, so the link to the recording and a PDF version of the slides will be sent to all registrants later this week. Great, so thank you again for attending today's webinar, which is co-hosted by SBE Gaia, OGCI, IOGP, and IPECA. My name is Amy Collins, the Climate Change Manager at IPECA. And just very briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with our organization, it's the Global Oil and Gas Association for Advancing Environmental and Social Performance across the energy transition. We were founded in 1974 at the request of the United Nations Environment Programme to develop a shared industry response to environmental and social issues. And today we remain the industry's principal channel for engagement with UNEP. And we lead in mainstreaming sustainability across oil, gas, and alternative energies activities by advancing climate action, environmental responsibility, and social performance. So I'm sure many of you on this webinar know CCUS is not a new technology, and IPECA has been working in this area since 2003, when we've held our first workshop. But it's only been in recent years that CCUS has become increasingly recognized as a key emissions mitigation technology that can help prevent the rise of atmospheric levels of CO2 and contribute to meeting the aims of the Paris Agreement. And we're seeing more CCS projects emerging around the world, with new projects announced during COP27, which took place a couple of weeks ago. But although we are seeing it gaining traction, and although tens of millions of tons of CO2 are already being captured, transported, and stored around the world, it's not really enough. It's not nearly at the scale it needs to be to keep global warming to 1.5 by mid-century. So it's very timely we look at how to accelerate deployment of CCS. So today's webinar forms part of a series that we have been organizing throughout the year to share knowledge and good practice and consider novel and different ways to scale up CCS to make it a viable option for limiting global warming. So far in the series, we've held 2 webinars, one on carbon take-back obligations, as well as a webinar on technological solutions for negative emissions, where we looked at the potential of direct air capture and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. If you are interested in these, the links to recordings can be found in the related content box on your screen. So today's webinar will focus on the learnings from the Midwest Regional Carbon Initiative, which is dedicated to the study, acceleration, acceptance, and deployment of commercial carbon capture utilization and storage in the United States. We are joined by Sally Greenberg from Illinois State Geological Survey, who has kindly agreed to share with us the work of the MRCI. We've also got Autumn Hagsma, who is a geologist at Battelle. She'll also be presenting for us today. And then towards the end of the webinar, we will have time for a Q&A session, which will be moderated by Arthur Lee, who's from Chevron Fellow and Principal Advisor and Chair of IPECA's CCS Task Force. As mentioned, please submit your questions at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll get to these towards the end of the webinar. So with that, I would like to hand straight over to Sally.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here. As Amy mentioned, my co-presenter today will be Autumn Hagsma. She'll take over for me about halfway through the presentation. And what I'm going to talk to you about today really is a lesson in what the United States has been doing for the last 25 years to first create a basis for and now create an opportunity for the acceleration of carbon capture, utilization, and storage throughout the United States. And so I'm going to tell you a bit of a story about the Regional Carbon Sequestration Partnership Program, which started in 2003, with the primary goal to execute large-scale carbon dioxide injection tests to evaluate best practices and technologies to implement carbon sequestration. And there were originally 7 regional partnerships, 2 with the name Midwest, the Midwest Regional Carbon Sequestration Partnership, which was led by Battelle, and the Midwest Geological Sequestration Consortium, which was led by the University of Illinois, the Illinois State Geological Survey. And for a while, we went on our separate paths, and we did about 18 years worth of research to develop and validate reservoir models, address public concerns, look at all of the various barriers and opportunities that carbon capture and storage presented in our individual regions. So under the Midwest Geological Sequestration Consortium, which I led, we did several enhanced oil recovery projects, one huff and puff and an enhanced coal bed methane project in what we called phase 2. And then phase 3 is a project you may be familiar with called the Illinois Basin Decatur Project, in which we captured 1 million tons of carbon dioxide from biofuel production in Decatur, Illinois, and stored that onshore in a saline reservoir. That project is known for executing a first-of-a-kind monitoring, verification, and accounting program, the first underground injection control Class 6 permits specifically for the injection of carbon dioxide in the United States, microseismic monitoring and interpretation, laying the groundwork for many, many projects in the region, and I'll get back to that, and also creating a comprehensive data set that is available through the U.S. Department of Energy's EDX platform. The Midwest Regional Carbon Sequestration Partnership also had 18 years worth of very successful carbon capture and utilization and storage innovation over a series of phases, as did the MGSC. Phase 2 was small-scale validation projects. Phase 3, they did multiple enhanced oil projects exploring different opportunities in the Michigan Basin. So in 2018, the Department of Energy changed its focus and wanted to go from 7 partnerships to 4. So the 2 Midwest partnerships joined forces and became the Midwest Regional Carbon Initiative. So that allowed us to cover 20 states within the United States, from the Midwest to the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, as seen here on this map. It also allowed us to leverage extensive past experience. We had multiple projects injecting carbon dioxide, over 14 million tons of carbon dioxide stored. We had enhanced oil recovery projects. We had biofuel industrial.
Excuse me, Sally, let me cut in. I think you need to start sharing the slides. You were talking about map, but there's no map. So you need to start sharing number 6.
So I'm presenting from slide view. Is that not what I should be doing? Live view.
Okay, I don't see your slides. Amy, am I doing something wrong here, Amy?
Sorry, Arthur. Yes, Sally, we can see your slides.
Okay, all right. My apologies then. For some reason, I'm frozen. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem, Arthur. So as I was mentioning, so what we have done in the Midwest Regional Carbon Initiative, which is basically from 2018 going forward, is we've leveraged the 20 years of past experience that we had individually to facilitate and to accelerate knowledge sharing and support and foundational research that needs to be done to accelerate CCUS in the Midwestern and Eastern regions of the United States. So the Midwest Regional Carbon Initiative is a collaboration, as were the 2 previous partnerships, just expanded. We have researchers, industry, government, and non-government organizations. This is an organizational chart. And really the main point here is there are a lot of players who contribute to the success and the work that goes into the MRCI. And one thing I'd really like to point out is that bottom tier, which may be difficult to read, but this whole effort is underscored by the state geological surveys, which house the majority of geologic data in our entire region. So we have all of the geological surveys in our region who participate in a working group and support and create the foundation for the work that's been being done. We have a significant diversity of carbon dioxide sources. We have more than 1/3 of the United States point sources for CO2. The regional emissions from industrial sources account for about 3/4 of that. And so with high concentrations, as you would expect, along the East Coast and the Ohio River Valley of the United States. And this figure here just shows the distribution and volumes of CO2 based on circle size. So our work is divided into 5 tasks. The first task is project development and administration. The second task is designed to address key technical challenges and establishing CCUS in the region. And so what we've done is we've divided the Midwest and Northeast geologic basins and provinces. We've subdivided them into many, many regions and based on their stratigraphy. And within those sub-basin subdivisions, we're characterizing the regional and sub-regional geologic framework. We're characterizing the basement structure for faulting and stress and induced seismicity potential, assessing commercial scale CO2 storage feasibility, demonstrating methods for assessing commercial scale storage, and facilitating industrial partnerships and regional technical collaborations. And one thing you may be familiar with is that the United States has a tax credit, which we call the 45Q tax credit. And what we've seen in the region is a significant acceleration in the interest and the amount of industry that is coming to us to learn about whether or not they can do carbon storage, where they can do it. So our understanding and models that have been created, all of that is really critical to the acceleration of CCUS within the United States. Task 3 allows us to leverage the research that we've done individually as partnerships for the last 20 years, compile that research and data sets and legacy seismic data to support CCS in the region. So we've taken over 1,000 reports, presentations, posters, et cetera, and we've made that into available databases that allow us to support commercial, but also research development. And you can just see some of the focus of where that data is centered. We're also, as I mentioned, leveraging legacy seismic data sets. So what we've done is we've taken more than 832 linear models of 2D, 43 square miles of 3D, and essentially paper, cassette, old school seismic, and we've incorporated that into a data set or data sets that we're looking at that focus and allow us to focus on various regions or subregions within our the MRCI region. Task 4 is about addressing the challenges of infrastructure development for CCUS. So we're looking at what are the strategies for developing local projects where you have a simple source and a sink, or a hub where you have multiple sources and one sink, or distributed where you have a connection of sources and sinks throughout the area. We've created 7 different scenarios that we will be doing research on going forward. And we have high-level trends explored and results from 3 of those scenarios that we're publishing on at this point. And then I'd like to now switch to task 5, which Autumn Hogsma leads. And that is essentially our technology transfer, outreach, and stakeholder engagement. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Autumn.
Thank you, Sally. As Sally mentioned, I'm one of the leads for our outreach and communication and engagement program for MRCI. I'm also a geologist, so it's been this interesting journey to develop new ways to communicate the science to multiple audiences. And that's really one of our ultimate goals here, is to make this knowledge accessible to all sorts of audiences and all sorts of different levels. And to do that, we developed a 3-phase approach to get us moving. We're very much in the later end of our phase 1, which has been mostly preparation, understanding who our audiences are, what types of materials we need to develop to reach those audiences, and making sure we have consistent branding and messaging, and what we want to communicate. For example, we developed a website, a podcast series, a newsletter, and things like that we can readily distribute to multiple people. At the same time, we're kind of also in this phase 2, as they overlap greatly, where phase 2 is focused on that action, that active phase, where we're going out and engaging with our different stakeholders. So we're using the information that we developed in phase 1, and we're distributing that in different ways. Phase 3 will really transition later in the project, where it's just that ongoing maintenance and sustaining that outreach program. For an example, here we have a lot of different activities that we developed under phase 1. Some of them are cross-cutting multiple audiences. As I mentioned, we do have a website. As Sally showed earlier, the database that we've developed of all of our past papers and reports and data sets, that's all shareable. You can look at that information on our website. I'll try to pop that into the chat or Q&A here at the end. It's the midwestccus.org, and there's a lot of great information on there. We also, as I mentioned, have a newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter. That newsletter is focusing on multiple audiences, where we do technical highlights, but we also do updates on what's going on across the region as far as policy and regulations, new projects, learning opportunities, and how we can engage others. And we ask our partners to provide us information too, so we can keep it as collaborative as possible. We're also very involved in the technical side of things as well. We are involved in APG, SPE, SEG, and multiple other organizations. We try our best to write peer-reviewed papers, present in conferences, give poster presentations, develop short course materials. And then one of the things that I really love that we're doing as well is reaching out to engage with students and educators across multiple grade levels. We've developed some hands-on learning activities, such as CCUS rock kits, where students and I guess all ages, because we received really positive feedback from even their parents and non-parents that were exploring these rock kits on linking what are the properties that make a reservoir and what properties make a cap rock. And also ongoing engagement with industry. We have had multiple companies and organizations reach out to us for information. We give presentations, introduction material to CCUS, and start making some really meaningful connections to help advance CCUS in the region. Another thing that we've been focusing on and really being aware of is how MRCI, the work that we're doing on MRCI, maps to the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I was excited to see, Gaia being involved in this. webinar because a lot of the work that we used as templates came from SEG and SBE and Gaia's work on kind of mapping the geosciences really to the different sustainable development goals. And there's a lot of ways that we can correlate what we're doing across these goals, but what we decided to do was focus in on our top 5 goals where we think we can make the most meaningful impact. And that's things like education, quality education, clean water, clean energy, clean industry and infrastructure, and climate action. Another venture that we have taken on the project is exploring the intersection between stakeholder engagement, environmental justice, and CCUS. So we've been kind of deep diving into environmental justice over the past year or so, and we had been working with some incredible graphic facilitators to develop a short course and focused on this intersection. We piloted our short course in September at our annual stakeholders meeting, and we are planning to broaden our offerings for this short course in the future. We developed a really nice workbook that highlights a lot of different concepts between stakeholder engagement and environmental justice. And one thing to really highlight was unexpected and really exciting that with our pilot short course, it filled up very rapidly several weeks before our event even occurred. So there's a lot of interest, and this could be a really important aspect to the successful deployment of commercial scale CCUS. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit for these last couple of slides and talk about some of the other things that we have done in the past and other considerations around using and storing in depleted oil and gas fields. So these can be ideal candidates for multiple reasons, but a couple of things to point out is that with these depleted oil and gas fields, they have proven that they are able to hold fluids over geologic timescales, so that hopefully that they have some efficient seals or trapping mechanisms in place. There's some other benefits when looking at depleted oil and gas fields, such as enhanced oil recovery, using CU2 to better recover oil. And then there's this whole recycling process so that you're using the CO2 over and over again until you are done with that EOR process in that specific field. And during that process, a certain percentage of that CO2 gets left behind. So there's this associated storage going on. And on another thing that you can do is at the end of that life cycle, at the end of EOR, you can use that and convert it to a storage. And as Sally also mentioned, that 45Q tax credit, this is another option. So the tax credit covers saline storage, but it also covers EOR storage. And then you have the added benefit of the additional potential earnings that you can get from the produced oil. For an example, this is a study that we performed under MRCSP on the northern Niagara Reef Trend, which is in the northern part of the Michigan Basin. The reef trend there has over 800 known Niagaran reefs that have been a really prolific oil and gas play in Michigan. And what we did was start to catalog all the characteristics of those 800 plus reefs to get an idea of how much storage is possible, how much oil could potentially be recovered, and then what if you filled up that reef at the end of EOR? How much more storage could you get out of that? So we explored multiple different methods, compared different calculations, including things that were, static and volumetric based, a fluid substitution based. We did something called a proximity analysis or a similarity analysis, comparing where they've actually done CO2 EOR in the reefs and how similar those were to other reefs to give us a gauge of how much could we expect to recover using CO2. This study showed that there's more than 250 million tons of storage possible across those reefs, with more than 100 million barrels of oil recoverable from those reefs. And similarly, following up on this, Joel Svinchek wrote a paper. This is an open access paper. Can find it in our database as well. But if you put his name in the Google search with, life cycle analysis, this will pop up. But he did a deep dive into looking at a full life cycle analysis of CO2 EOR in those reefs, looking at all along the value chain where CO2 was being produced and how much was actually being stored at the end of the process. And what they found out was that this was actually a good example of a net negative process where at the end of the day, more CO2 is being stored across the whole process than was being produced. And scaling this up, we've done some look across the region at what are all the opportunities for these types of fields. And there's numerous across the different basins and provinces in the MRCI region. We've looked at these mostly from the storage standpoint. We largely have unknown EOR potential for these fields, except for some specific examples like the reefs where we did a little bit more of a deep dive in it. But there's a lot of fields and a lot of potential for utilizing those fields for either improved oil recovery or for storage or both. And with that, I'll hand it back to Sally if she has any closing remarks.
Thank you, Autumn, and thank you for stepping in and talking a bit about the enhanced oil recovery research that's come through the MRCSP and the MRCI. I just want to finish by saying that this approach that the United States has taken to create, build knowledge, capacity, and experience is paying out significantly now as we move towards commercial CCS, because we have a bank of experts really that have 20 years worth of experience in this space that they can contribute to the development of commercial projects, but also carry with them the brain trust and the institutional knowledge of past experiences so that we can bring best practices to bear for the development and acceleration of CCUS. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Arthur, who's going to moderate questions and answers, and we look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally. And I should have said up in the beginning, again, apologies for that interruption, but I should have said in the beginning it was so good to see you at the Greenhouse Gas Technology Conference 16th, when the whole community was back together again. It's really encouraging to see the whole CCS community back together. So it was great to see you. One of the first questions that is being asked here is, well, more of a comment, and please take it, I think, positively. I think one of the first comments is there's a lot of plans and a lot of communications, seems like, in this phase. Can you say a little bit more about actual actions that might happen in the second phase of this project? I know you already talked about some of the actions in the previous versions of MRCI in the two separate initiatives of 20 years of experience. But any comment in response to that comment about plans and communications?
Yeah, so I think it bears repeating that there was a pandemic in between the time when the regional initiatives were started or renewed and now. And so, but also I want to highlight that this iteration of the regional partnerships or regional initiatives really are designed to go back to the very beginning of where we started, and that is to create the basis and fundamental research that underlies the opportunity for others to do carbon capture and storage. So we partner with a lot of commercial projects through our various organizations, whether that be Battelle or the Illinois State Geological Survey or any of the other geological surveys that are part of the region, and it is our role to be the instigator or the support that underlies the ability for various projects to go forward. So I'll use an example in Illinois. Archer Daniels Midland, which was our research partner for the Illinois Basin Decatur project and the host site, they're taking all of the wells and all of the infrastructure that was developed during the MGSC efforts from 2008 until last year, and they are working with 8 Rivers to develop a regional project that can take carbon dioxide from multiple sources and store it there in Decatur. So that's an example of how leveraging where we've been is allowing us to move forward. The other thing that I would say to that, Arthur, is that you know, the U.S. Department of Energy and our Congress continue to evolve in how they fund the regional initiatives. And so our ability to do projects in the way that we have in the past is dependent upon our ability to have specific dedicated funding come into the regional partnerships, but also our ability to work with other entities as research partners.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sally. Kind of in that similar vein about projects being developed and to be executed, I have a commenter here who wanted to understand what are some of the challenges that you expect to see in that perhaps Autumn would expect to see in stakeholder engagement and also about environmental justice, the 2 of the key components that you now have to have in the projects. Perhaps for Autumn.
Autumn, do you want to take that?
Sure, and then Sally, I hope that you'll jump in as well, because Sally has extensive experience in outreach and stakeholder engagement, especially with the MGSC projects. But there's definitely going to be some challenges, and those are going to be largely related to, I think, perception. There's a lot of maybe sometimes negative perception around CCUS. And it is going to be our goal to tackle some of that, things like induced seismicity, really communicating and making sure that things are done correctly and safely. And that's going to be certainly a priority, not just on the technical side, but on the communication side. Then when it comes to environmental justice, there's definitely been a lot of communities in the MRCI region that have been negatively impacted by industrial activities. So right now it's pretty early stages for us, but we're trying to understand what those impacts are and how to best communicate with those communities and work with those communities to make sure that they are engaged and part of the process. Another thing that we have coming up outside of the regional initiatives, there's several upcoming carbon safe projects. And part of those carbon safe projects, we have to have a dedicated environmental justice plan and stakeholder engagement plan. Another thing is it's called Justice 40. So it's how we can integrate all those pieces and really involve communities. And that's going to be more on the commercial deployment side of things at specific sites than regionally. But we've taken what we're learning on the regional initiative and applying it to those. Sally, do you want to add to that?
Sure. As anybody who knows me knows, I probably have a lot to say on this, but I'll keep my remarks short so we can get to other questions. Some of the things that Autumn just mentioned, Justice 40 and stakeholder engagement plans and environmental justice plans, that all comes from the United States government, from the Biden administration, from an executive order 14008, which calls for climate action and climate justice. And so the the federal government, including the Department of Energy that funds the majority of CCUS research in the United States, has a commitment to ensure that 40% of federal dollars are sent towards specific types of projects. And CCUS falls within that level. And to make sure that 40% of that funding goes to benefit what are designated as environmental justice communities. So environmental justice in a new way is becoming systemic to the way that we think about stakeholder engagement and the way that we will go forward. Autumn mentioned in her slides that we have spent the last year really educating ourselves as a team because we did not feel adequately prepared to make the leap from stakeholder engagement to environmental justice. And so what we've learned in educating ourselves along the way will really inform the way that we go about conducting stakeholder engagement that is more inclusive, that is more diverse, and that has us focusing on the importance of engagement in different ways. And let me just first or lastly say that outreach and stakeholder engagement have been fundamental to the regional carbon sequestration partnerships from the very beginning. And so what we see with environmental justice is not necessarily that this is something new, but this is a deepening of the effort and the need for stakeholder engagement and brings to the table a whole new set of stakeholders that have historically been left out of decision making. And so our ability to function in that space and to contribute again, through research projects, but also through expertise. The workshop that we put together, we're so very proud of. It was amazing. And we hope to be able to deploy that in places like the joint AAPG, SEG, SPE workshop, or a conference in Houston in next April, and other fora. And so we really anticipate being leaders in that space going forward.
Okay, there is actually a couple other comments here about communications and outreach. I don't want to belabor the point too much, but there is one that's very interesting for widespread deployment. It's all about infrastructure, about pipelines, especially how pipeline, in some cases have affected communities. So what are some lessons learned that you think you can apply here in terms of infrastructure, permitting, and also stakeholder engagement when infrastructure will be built in the future?
Yeah, so I'm really glad you brought that up, Arthur, because that was pipelines was one of the things that was in my mind that I forgot in my last ramble. So pipelines are creating a very interesting challenge for CCUS. Up until this point, most projects have been a single source or source to sink situation, and you haven't had these regionally extensive pipelines such as the Heartland Pipeline, which is planned to go from South Dakota to Illinois, passing through many different states, collecting CO2 from different industrial sources, with the ultimate terminus being storage in the Illinois basin. So what we're finding is that because pipelines are very identifiable, very close to homes, very near the surface, this presents a stakeholder engagement challenge, perhaps that is unlike what we have dealt with before. So in terms of best practices and thinking about addressing that challenge, it's very important to be open and transparent and show landowners exactly what the impact of a pipeline might be. Safety is a key concern, proximity to homes. In the Midwestern part of the United States, where the MRCI is based, something that's very important to remember is that land is part of people's identity. So we have people who have farmed or lived on acreage for more than 100 years. We have something in the United States called the century farm. That means your family has owned and farmed that land for 100 years. So when you think about landowners like that as a stakeholder, you need to understand their identity is wrapped up in the land, their wealth, their legacy, the future of their children. So if you come in and you're instantly talking about eminent domain or somehow damaging the land, then it's very, very difficult to build a relationship or to have some sort of exchange with landowners or community members who are frightened or potentially frightened by the activity. Some things that need to happen in the United States, PHMSA, which is the Pipeline Hazard Agency, we need more regulations. We need perhaps greater safety requirements. All of those things, landowners and people impacted by pipelines need to have a say in and need to be at the table. So all of those things I think are really critical in the pipeline space. And pipeline companies need to be willing to go around property. I mean, it's not necessarily the straightest line or the most expedient pathway for the pipeline company. The other thing is that the United States is considering the possibility of permitting specific corridors in which we would accumulate or aggregate pipelines. And so that may be a way, if the the federal and government and state governments can sort of agree on where those passageways are, those pathways are, that may be a way to alleviate some of this. But I would say by far and away, pipelines represent the largest stakeholder engagement challenge that CCUS faces at this time.
Well, thank you, Sally, for that very comprehensive answer and certainly a very, very transparent one, very honest one about that kind of stakeholder engagement. Let's get off of that topic a little bit and move on to a different area. I think that a lot of things worth discussing here about negative emissions. So, for example, Autumn presented a paper, Sminchak et al. I think I got that right. Sminchak et al. Is a very interesting paper. Now, is that a case with very specific assumptions in the whole life cycle so that negative emissions occur? Or is that something much more, can be more generalized? That's one of the questions we have here.
Autumn?
Yeah, I think for that case, it was specific, but I think it gave some pretty thorough examples of what are some of the things that you need to consider in accounting for, and some broader things that you can account for as well. So I do think the methodology in there is applicable to multiple scenarios and cases.
Okay, thank you. Yes, yeah, Sally, go ahead, please.
I would just add to that is one of the things that the MRCI seeks to do, is to do these specific research efforts or projects and then look to what is generalizable and create methods that can be applied and tested on other data sets or other subregions. So very much part of the answer is yes, and there's more to come.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Again, very transparent and very straightforward answer. Thank you. I have a couple of people here, at least three people here, wanting to talk a little bit more about costs and economics. Let's talk a little bit about that. What are some of the major cost components to a project that you see here in the Midwest Regional Initiative? The cost components to deploying projects across such a wide region.
Interesting question, and not unexpected. And I would say, in general, cost depends on what part of the CCUS value chain that you're talking about. Capture continues to be the majority of the cost. Capturing the building and the building of infrastructure that allows you to capture, but then also the separation process, which, how much is needed in terms of scaling up our ability to separate CO2 from diverse streams, emission streams. So that continues to be the primary cost. If you want to talk about storage projects, I just presented a paper which will be coming out in the Energy Procedia of GHGT 16 about the costs associated with the Illinois Basin Decatur project. And we were asked by the Department of Energy to do a scale up of what those costs looked like from a 1 million ton storage project to a 1 million ton per year over 20 years. So essentially taking IBDP costs and projecting what costs might be in the future. So if you look at the actual ton per cost of CO2 stored at the Illinois Basin Decatur project, it's about $90 per ton. If you, but that was a 3-year injection, very short period of time, no amortization of equipment or anything like that. But if you look at all of the costs to do a similar project at about 2/3 more volume per year, 1 million ton per year from ethanol, you're looking at about $35 per ton CO2 stored. So that gives you a sense that over the long run, the storage, the wells are probably your largest expense. If you are doing repeat 3D seismic as part of your monitoring strategy, that's also going to be expensive, but that's really where the majority of the expense lies. Even your deep subsurface monitoring and your near surface monitoring is a fraction of the cost compared to the development of the infrastructure you need for storage. And then with respect to pipelines, I think you're looking at pretty typical pipeline costs. In the United States, we use the metric of about $1 million per mile. And I think that is pretty much going to hold.
Okay, good. Thank you for that, Sally. You alluded to in your answer here and also in the presentation to this extensive experience that you yourself have had over 20 years on at least one of the projects, the Decatur project. What are some of the people in the audience would like to know? What are some of the learnings that you have that you can share about Class 6 permitting lessons?
Also a very good question. So, there's many learnings about Class 6. Having had the experience of being involved in the first 2 Class 6 permits in the United States, some things that I think we've learned is that you need to be very cognizant of what the regulatory time clock is, when it starts and how it works. And that means, you may be having preliminary conversations with regulators, but the clock doesn't start ticking on your permit application or the process until you've received acknowledgement from the EPA or the Environmental Protection Agency or the permitting entity, because we have a couple of states that have primacy, that you have a complete permit application. You also need to understand that there are advantages to requesting to have a public hearing. You don't have to have a public hearing, but one of the things that we found that shortened the timeline was for us as the project developer, or not us, but ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, who is the permit holder for both projects in Decatur, by them requesting a public hearing on the very first day of the open comment period, for example, then we were able to shorten the overall public process to include that public hearing. So, but the thing that I would say by far and away that is the absolute most important and perhaps most misunderstood part of the permitting process is that when you get a permit, when you get a final Class 6 permit, that is a permit to construct a well. That means you can go out and you can drill your well. Once you've drilled your well, you are required to prepare a document, submit all of your logs, all of your data, perhaps remodel your area of review, and compile that into what's called a completion report. So once the completion report is submitted with the EPA, then there is a period of time where they review that completion report. You may have public comment period. And so there's a high degree of uncertainty between the permit, which gives you permission to construct, and the authorization to inject. So the greatest risk, the thing you need to minimize the most, is that period of ambiguity between when you get your permit to construct and when you get your authorization to inject. The analogy I like to use, this might be a little bit US centric, so forgive me, is when you get a permit to drive a car, you're 16, you can drive your car with your parents or perhaps an older sibling, right? But you can't operate that car. You don't have a license to operate that car until you've passed the tests and gone to the Department of Motor Vehicles, which then issues you a license. It's that same thing. The difference is that we understand, and it's known how long between when you get your permit to drive and when you get your license to drive by yourself. What we don't know is that period for the Class 6 process. So you want to be doing everything possible to minimize that amount of uncertainty in that period. And that's going to be your biggest delay with respect to a permit.
Thank you, Sally. That too, it's a great, very comprehensive answer. Thank you for that. I think let me get down into a little bit of details around SDGs, since that was presented by Autumn about Sustainable Development Goals. There are, let me combine a couple of questions here. There's a question around how is that helpful? How is CCS helpful in terms or impactful on wetlands, for example? Can you get into a little bit of that as well, about life on land and wetlands? How does CCS help or hinder that, Autumn?
It's a great question. And we're, transparency is that we're still very much diving into these. We did a really kind of a group brainstorming, if you will, on these 17 different goals, and really following some of the examples laid out by Maria Angela Capello and the folks that she worked with on pulling this together for the geophysics side of things and for the geoscience side of things. But we're looking at this kind of more holistically because of the larger, I think, climate impact that the reduction of CO2 could have, and the positive impact that could have on not just wetlands, but multiple different land types. But with this process, as I showed, we did kind of focus in on those top five goals for us right now. so that we could, ones that we felt most confident in, and ones that we wanted to really focus on for the project, and also giving us time to evaluate the remaining goals in more detail.
Great. Thank you, Autumn, for that. Let me, there are a couple of very technical folks here, experts here, I'm sure, who wants to understand a little bit about the details. So is there the database that you have collected, that you've combined from the two Midwest initiatives, are there a lot of industry legacy data that's also included, or are they mainly from geologic surveys of the states?
Autumn, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, I can jump in. Yeah, it's a combination of both. So we really started with what we had readily available based off of our past projects. And those past projects were a combination of data information provided by different geologic surveys, but also what we have termed the piggybacking operations, where we engage with local operators, oil and gas, brine disposal, and other types, where we go in and enter their wells and collect data and utilize that data. So we have that type of information too. We have data that's been donated to us from folks that are either just interested in supporting CCUS and its growth in the region, folks that are retiring, people that just, like, I have like the seismic data, they just have a garage full of data that they don't want to see go to waste, and they need it, they would like to see that pass on and go somewhere. So it's really been a collection of different types of sources and different types of data that have been being integrated to develop these databases.
Yeah, let me just add that we do work with partners in which we use data that is business confidential. And so we don't put anything into our collective databases or make things available for which we do not have permission. So, you know, to some degree, the extent of our ability to use commercial data relies on industry and their permission to allow us to do so.
Okay, great. I have time for one more question, a very brief one, and then I'll turn it back over to Amy Collins. This one is it's almost like would sound like a lightning round from one of these TV shows. But there's only two of you. So in 7 years' time, we're near the end of 2022 now. So in 7 years' time, do you believe there will be more than 20 million tons per year to be stored in the Midwest region?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I guess, Autumn, you would agree with the boss, right?
I agree, yes.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, and with that, let me turn it back over to Amy. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arthur.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Sally and Autumn, for a great presentation and a really open discussion just then. And thank you, Arthur, for moderating that. And thank you for everyone for taking the time to listen and ask your questions. I hope you found it interesting and useful. So as I mentioned earlier, a recording of this webinar and the slides will be sent to you hopefully later this week. And we'll also send over the resources that were mentioned throughout the webinar as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the week.